This is called Human Journey Across the Ages. I am a professor at the University of Toronto in Canada, and I'm a historian of science. My first degree is in nuclear physics, but I have gotten very deeply involved in the history of science, particularly the history of physics in the 20th century. And my interests are in cultural history and the history of science as it relates to culture and politics and human development. So in this next set of 12 lectures I'll be giving you here, and they are called enrichment lectures, so I hope I can enrich you in some ways or the other. And they are mostly about our journey across the ages, human journey across the ages. And it's a different kind of journey than the cruise that you're taking, because it is a journey that is biological and social as well as spiritual, because it is so much journey that takes in our own heads and in our own souls and our own hearts. Let me show you this one here. And many people think that our journey started about a few thousand years ago, when we call the beginning of human civilization is about 10,000 years old, which is the beginning of agriculture. But human beings have been on the planet much longer. Not as long as many other creatures, but long time. And many things that we associate with ethics or morality were already in the making before any religion was invented or discovered. So in the process, we ask this question: what is so special about human beings? Are we special in the universe? Now, I said our journey is both biological and cultural. So this journey can be associated it's not functioning here. Okay. Our notion of what is human is quite interesting, quite fascinating. We sometimes say something is very dehumanizing, or we say something is very humane, or we say it is crimes against humanity. And so we use the word humanity and humane and humanizing in a sense that we have some notion of what is human. And so much so that we sometimes say that all the things that we study in colleges and universities come under the form of arts and philosophy and psychology and classics. We call them humanities. It's not a singular word, it's a plural word, as though we are defining not human beings by one single word, by many notions of what is human. So what is human? This idea comes to me in the context of something that I observed on my cruise last year. And this is something that you might know about the accident that occurred some 50 years ago called thalidomide babies. Many women who were pregnant for their morning sickness were advised to take this particular drug that had just been invented called thalidomide. And because of this drug, unfortunately, thousands of children were born in many parts of the world who had no arms and no legs. Now, I have studied this particular phenomenon for quite some time. I have written about it. But I had never met anybody before this last year. I was on a cruise that was going through Panama Canal, and my lecture was in the morning, and I was speaking about some of the medical experiments that had gone wrong. And in the evening, on the dance floor, suddenly I see a person in a wheelchair, and she had no arms and no legs. And I missed a beat of my heart. I said, my God, I had never seen one before. And then I saw this woman who must be about 54 or 55 at that time. And suddenly she had a special switch on her wheelchair, and she was dancing on her wheelchair. And she was going on and on and on with such gusto. I had never seen anybody with such sense of joy. And here we were passing through Panama Canal. A Panama Canal is a small canal, but it connects two great oceans. And suddenly I was touched by the humanity of this person. That even though this person, for 54 years, no arms, no legs, and must be a great responsibility for those who were bringing her up, but see, she had certainly a sense of joy and sense of humanity about her. And I was deeply touched. And I asked myself, what is it to be human? And what is it that keeps defining us again and again, our humanity? So I bring you this particular painting. We will be visiting Tahiti soon. This painting was made in Tahiti by one of the great French artists, Paul Gauguin. And he made it in 1897, about 130 years ago. And this painting raises the question, who are we? Where are we going? Where did we come from? It's considered one of the great paintings in the Western art. And it is, this question, this painting, the theme of it, in a way came after about 40 years of the publication of Charles Darwin's great book on the origin of species. So it's not a question that was mostly scientific in nature. It is a spiritual question. Where are we coming from? Where are we going? And so this is all part of human journey and being defining our humanity. And I will come to it again and again in all my lectures because I feel the essential part of human journey is essentially spiritual in nature. And I will come to it, as I said, again and again in my various presentations. Now, this is not working here. Can we, okay. Now, as I said, we are human beings, but not the very first ones to come on this earth. We have been here a long time, but there were many other creatures that have been here much longer. And there are about 1.5 million species in the world, so far we have discovered, out of which there are 1 million species which are less than 1 centimeter in length. And they are going on their way of, they're continuing their ways of life and their ways of creation without any concern for the human presence on this earth. There is one scientist, a famous biologist at the University of Harvard. His specialty is study of ants. And he says there are about 1,000 trillion ants in the world. Human population is about 7 billion, a little over 7 billion. So he says compared to the human population, the population of the ants is, of course, much greater. But the weight of ants is almost as much as the weight of the human population. And his thesis is, and his assertion is, that if the ants disappeared from the earth, the life, the ecology of the earth will disintegrate. Whereas if human beings no longer live on the earth, life can still go on. Now, this is a very strong, interesting assertion, because it begins to show that human beings, as far as the ecology of the earth is concerned, its living organisms are concerned, they are only secondary to the earth. But there was out of this 1.5 million species of species that are on the earth, it's very fascinating. About 25% of it, a quarter of them, are beetles. And we don't know why. But one of the great geneticists, J.B.S. Holden from England, was once asked, what is his notion of after studying genetics, what is his idea of the creator's mind? He says, an inordinate fondness for beetles. He must be very fond of beetles, because there are so many beetles in the universe. So we see this, whether it's ants or worms or beetles, that there's life goes on without necessarily giving recognition to the human presence in the earth. So what is then so special about human beings? As I said, there are about 7 billion of us. And they're on every continent. And we are growing. About 2,000 years ago, in the beginning of the Christian era, there were only 250 million of us. So the growth has been colossal. And this is despite all the diseases, all the wars, and many other things that have happened, we are growing. So then what is so special about us, and how are we related to the rest of the creation? This is not. Could you please change it? Could you kindly please change it for me? Oh, we're having problems here. Okay, let me just continue. There are three things that we share with the rest of the living organisms. Three things. And this is what is our discovery, a human discovery. That is what we discover about other living organisms. That every living organism, whether it's a mosquito or a tiger or a swan or a whale, every living organism needs food. It needs food. And it's relentlessly engaged in trying to find food. And so much energy goes into trying to find food. And this food has to come from outside. It is not inside the body. This is true of all creatures on the earth. That every creature is constantly and relentlessly looking for food. This is what defines a living organism. Now, this is true about human beings as well. We have been so many of us, until about 100 years ago, 70 to 80% people were engaged in creating food. Now, that has changed dramatically. In most Western countries, no more than 3 or 5% people are engaged in producing food. It's in what we call developing world, the third world countries, there are still many people, 60, 70, 80% people. In Nepal, we just recently had an earthquake there last week. There are 80% people are engaged in producing food. Whereas in Canada, USA, Australia, and most European countries, less than 5% people are producing food. So our human beings too are engaged in producing food, but the way we produce food, how we collect it, how we preserve it, how we share it, that has changed dramatically in this last 10,000 years. The second thing that all living organisms are engaged in, that how to make sure that you do not become food for somebody else. This is a very important part of all biological systems, that how you do not become food for somebody else. So all living organisms have devised ways of making sure that they're faster than their prey, they are cunning, they can hide somewhere, they can run away, they can fly away. So there are many ways in which there is a system of prey and what is being preyed upon, so that the food, what is being search for food goes on. Now this is true of human beings as well. We have been engaged in trying to make sure the others do not steal our food. But it's not just our food that we are worried about. So many of our wars are about resources, whether it is about oil or about other resources. So we find that in the human context, that equation changes. So certainly in the living organisms, we notice again and again that every living organism is engaged in making sure that does not become prey for somebody else. The third thing that defines living organism, every living organism, again whether it is a small mosquito or it's a tiger, is engaged is trying to procreate itself, making copy of itself. And so it's true about human beings. We see that how life perpetuates, how it goes on, how we create ourselves. So these are the three things that define ourselves in common with the rest of the living organisms. Yet, as I said, we have gone on a different path in all these three directions. We procreate differently. We now say we don't necessarily engage in procreation even when we have sexual act. It is not necessarily an act for procreation. We can postpone it. We can stop it, and so on. Some of this new technology that has come about in the last 50, 60, 100 years. So we see that already from the animal kingdom, we are departing in slightly different directions. But certainly these three things define us as it being in common with the rest of the animal kingdom. But then there are points of departure. Are we going to have a different slide here? Oh, okay. Thank you very much. So I already mentioned to you about this relentless search for food, whether it is a small butterfly or a mosquito or a tiger, everywhere. This is what defines a living organism, as relentless search for food. Now, the food is not the same for all living organisms. It's different. But nevertheless, it's a food that must come from outside of their system. It's not something that can be generated from within the system. And then the second, okay. Now, again, how so many different ways of protecting and being not food for other creatures. And then we see how the urge for procreation. Now, in the human beings, this urge for procreation has so many manifestations, but also we see this urge very on a grand scale in the animal kingdom. This a film was made a few years ago about the penguins and how they take care of their baby egg and under very difficult conditions and temperatures. So you see in nature this amazing process that goes on. So these three things we share with the rest of the creation. But where is the departure? We have the genetic pool. We now, with the discoveries and more genome studies, we find that so much of genes we share with other creatures. And so many times people say, well, we are therefore no different from others. I will have a slightly different take on it presently. So we also have a great relationship with other animals, whether those animals are our pets or they're our beasts of burden, and whether we see them as our extension of ourselves, because one of the great books that came out a few years ago, How the Elephants Weep. This notion, do the other animals have emotions? Do they have sense of envy or jealousy or empathy or sympathy? Or how do they mourn when somebody dies in their family? And so a whole range of emotion. Of course, in the human beings, our emotions are even far more complex. Sense of irony, sense of tragedy, sense of remorse. So, but we are beginning to, as we study more and more about animal kingdom, we find that we have often ignored that there is a range of emotions that we do share with other animals. Okay. So, first thing that distinguishes us greatly from other creatures and makes us special. Now, the word special needs to be qualified. When I say special, I do not mean that human beings are superior to others, or necessarily, and that we should therefore treat other animals unkindly or in a manner that reduces their being. So, so in a way, every creation is special. A butterfly is special. A lamb is special. A tiger is special. So in a sense, all creation is special. But what distinguishes us human beings in a different category altogether from other animals, one of the things that defines us very remarkably is the sense of language. Now, of course, all animals have also means of communication and transformation of information, and where the food is to be found, the mating, where something is hiding, and so on. But human language, and I have a lecture that I will be presenting you later in the series about the origin of language. But human language is far more complex than anything we notice in the animal kingdom. For instance, there are about 7,000 languages in the world, and we wonder why there are different languages. And then the structure of the language, the grammar of the language. There is a noun, there is an adjective, there's a pronoun, and an adverb. Now, this kind of mode of transmission of information and ideas is something very unique to human beings. Language is a great, great special gift of human beings. And especially as we learn to see the complexity of it, we see how it distinguishes us from other creatures on a very grand scale. So language is one of the major features that is special to us human beings, especially its complexity. Okay, the language of mathematics. Now, mathematics is a very abstract form of language. And its discovery, whether it's discovery of zero or decimal or the numeral system, and then the other kinds of higher mathematics, that discovery is unique to us. No other creatures, as far as we have learned so far. I must qualify that because we are the ones who are studying others, or we don't see other creatures studying us. We are the ones who are studying them. And so as far as we know, so as far as we have discovered so far, we do not see that other creatures have discovered anything in the nature of mathematics. And mathematics is one of the great discoveries of human mind. And so much how its complexity, its abstraction, and its use in science and technology. So mathematics, the language of mathematics, which is very different from the language we use, which has its own grammar. So mathematics does not have the same grammatical structure, but it has its own language. So the second is the urge for freedom. This is something very unique to us human beings. Now, of course, when here in this picture, we see the birds as an expression of freedom. But really, in human beings, this urge is so deep and so profound and so pervasive and for so long that we are quite mesmerized by the idea of freedom. Freedom from hunger, freedom from want, freedom from exploitation, freedom from desire, and then freedom of expression, freedom of worship, freedom of movement. And so these are the freedoms we have been fighting for and struggling for. And then ultimately we talk of liberation, and we even talk of nirvana as the freedom of the soul. So we find that our urge and need and desire and struggle for freedom, and these are freedoms of political and cultural and freedom from oppression of various kinds, or what we consider freedom to be. My next book is entitled 7,000 Million Degrees of Freedom, which is how many people there are in the world. And so I find the freedom is a very deeply entrenched notion in human beings. Do we see this in other animals? Not quite right. We see them sometimes when they are being mistreated or they're running away. But this notion of freedom is essentially an escape from being hunted or escape from being made into food. But our notion of freedom is different. It's not just that we are being made into food, but that we want freedom of all kinds. Cultural freedom, freedom of the heart, freedom to do what we want to be, the freedom to be what we wish to be. So our notion of freedom is something deeply, strangely, and supremely and profoundly human. Then this idea of ethics. Very important part. Many people say, well, do the animals have ethics? Do they have morality? And what is morality? And this goes, again, very deeply in the study of animal behavior. Are we humans more ethical, more moral? Certainly, we human beings have been engaged in formulating ethics, morality. And whether that morality is what should we do with the stranger, with a member of our own family, how do we treat somebody who's a slave, somebody who's inferior to us, somebody who's disabled, and so on. Ethics is a very important part of human behavior. It precedes before the invention of any religion. And many religions, we often think religion is what gives us ethics. And there are others who say the other way around, that we were more ethical before religions were invented. But nevertheless, the making of human beings, questions of how do we resolve conflict, what is the right thing to do, what is not acceptable thing to do, how do we treat people in the family, how do we treat strangers, how do we treat people of another tribe, or people of another language, of another color, and so on and so on. These are ethical questions that have been asked for a long time, and they still continue to haunt us because we're still discovering and making new ethical issues. And for instance, this idea of universal human rights that came about in 1948 say what kind of rights? Who has the right to do what to whom? And what are then rights, and then what duties go with the rights? So this whole question of rights and duties have been integral to all civilizations. And we have been struggling, and we still are struggling. Do we see this in other animals? Well, not really so. We don't see it. We see sometimes the animals do not necessarily engage in cruelty, as we sometimes human beings do. We invent many weapons of destruction, which we do not see animals doing it. So, but nevertheless, it distinguishes us greatly from other animals, that we have a moral instinct. Steven Pinker, a psychologist from Harvard University, he's written a book called Moral Instinct, as though we have an instinct for morality. And what that does not mean we all live morally, but we still desire to live morally. And so we define civilization, or cultures, higher cultures, lower cultures, in terms of how well and how morally we live. And when we do not live morally, we say, you're a beastly behavior. It's a beast, he's a beast-like. So we often associate that behavior as something inhuman or not quite human. So this is something that defines us very greatly. And then we also have many masks that we wear. We pretend to others to be moral, but we cheat, or we have hypocrisy. So there's many things that define us about our human behavior. And then how do we learn about it? Well, this is where humanities, the study of humanities, our literature, our classics, our philosophy, that define and tell us what is the whole range of things that we human beings engage in. But certainly morality or moral dilemmas, and what should be right and what can be right, what is the context in which an action is taking place, all this becomes part of ethics. In the philosophy, in all philosophy departments, all philosophy discourses, ethics is a very important issue. And these days, for the last 50 years or so, a lot of ethics is being talked about in medicine, under what kind of experiments can be conducted. I mentioned to you thalidomide, babies being born, and the use of drugs, and many other experiments. So many of these will not be permitted today because of the questions of what is ethical, what is bioethics, what is medical ethics, what is legal ethics, what is professional ethics, and so on and so on. So every day, everywhere, as the world is being more and more globalized, we raise this question of ethics. What is right? What is not right? What is not acceptable? What would create conflict? And what would resolve conflict? So ethics is something that is very human, that is very special to us. And that does not mean that other creatures, as we study more about them, as we learn more about them, that there is a certain morality, certain way of behaving, and certain kinds of compassion and mercy, or not attacking an animal which is injured. We see that. But again, in human beings, it becomes so complex, so far more complex, that it seems quite unique to us. This needs to be... OK. Well, the next question, a question of justice and law, and which is, again, very unique to us human beings. That makes us very special. We have notion of the word, it is said among us children in the Western world, the word that is used most often, it is not fair. A young kid of 5, 6, 7 years old say, Mama, that's not fair. So this notion of fairness, what is just, what is right, what is wrong, and that seems already very much ingrained in our notion of ethics. And then, how is this justice to be meted out? We use the word phrase, say, one must not take the law in one's own hand. And this idea is not has not been around for very long, this idea. Whose hand should the law be in? If you don't take the law in your own hand, if you don't avenge, if you don't take revenge, then who should punish you for doing wrong? So we have created systems of justice, courts, and that notion that the people who then conduct these systems of justice, that they're impartial, they're fair, that they're not loaded, they're not kangaroo courts, they're fair. And if we can instill this faith and this confidence in others that justice will be meted out, then obviously we can say to people, say to each other, that we must not take law in our own hand. Otherwise, revenge and anger and resentment and more revenge, this has been the law, this has been the system for a long time in almost all societies. But increasingly, with modernization, with the idea of civilizing forces, we say that systems of justice and law are integral to our human ways of doing things. And that is, and more civilized societies are, the more we say, well, this is how justice must be conducted. Now we have international code of justice, in which not only at the national level, but at the international level, when there are conflicts between nations. And so you see how, over the years, we have advanced this notion of justice and law as becoming an integral part of something special to human beings. And again, we do not see this in the animal kingdom. We don't see a tiger being hauled up before another tiger and say, you did wrong, so I'm going to, this is how it will be doing it. We do not observe this in any part of animal kingdom, where this idea of what is to be done, how a conflict is to be resolved through discussion, through witnesses, through impartial judgments, and so on. So this is something very unique to us human beings again. Now, let me just make a comment before. This system has to be more effective. The picture before, I should just make a quick comment. You saw the symbol of justice. It is before the law school in University of Alabama, that statue. And she is blindfolded. The idea is justice is blind. That means it's impartial. But behind that figure, what's going on here? Can we go back, please, to that figure? Yes. But behind this, if you notice, another figure hanging just behind the figure of justice, who's blindfolded. That is the goddess of mercy. That even that justice is blind and it's impartial, but it still is being goaded by mercy to be merciful, kind, compassionate. So we have these two forces of mercy and justice coming together. And this is a statue that stands before the School of Law at the University of Alabama in USA. And I remember visiting it. I was deeply touched by it, that this is an angel of mercy hovering over the goddess of justice. Then this next level of sympathy and empathy that human beings have developed over the centuries. Not only a sense of sympathy and empathy, feeling the other's pain as one's own. Not only of my own brother or a sister or a son or a daughter or a mother, immediate members of the family, of blood relations, but of strangers, of the other who is not related, who is a complete stranger. This sense of empathy and sympathy runs very deep and has been, in the process of civilizing forces, has been developed more and more as the years have gone by. One particular example that comes to my mind is during in 1960s, in 1963, a young man, he was 34 years old. He was a white man in southern part of USA. He was so deeply touched by what he saw was the fate of the black people and how they were being treated in the southern part of USA. So he decided, what would it be like to be a black person? So he decided to become black. And so he had a pigment introduced in his body, and his hair's changed, and his lips changed, and he became like a black person. And for 4 years, he stayed like this. And to the extent that his own members of his own family could not recognize him. And he wrote a book, a remarkable book, called Black Like Me. And a book which stirred the whole movement, civil rights movement in USA in the 1960s. And the whole idea that here I'm trying to see does it feel to be another. And then not only see what it feels, then make it possible for others to see it. And so this is a great, remarkable example of a person's sense of empathy and sympathy, which is so truly human. We don't see this, again, in the animal kingdom. In a similar vein, an editor of a newspaper in Canada, Globe and Mail, one of the top newspapers of the country, a person, John Stackhouse, who had been an editor, who had been a correspondent for the newspaper in India for many years. He was a young man when he had gone there at the age of 27 or so. And when he returned to Canada after 10 years, he was quite shocked to see in the winter months in Toronto, people homeless people shivering in the cold and without food and so on. And he was quite shocked that how is it possible, a country which is so rich, and so rich in so many ways and generally so caring of other people, that there are homeless people in the winter months. So he decided, I want to know what does it feel to be a homeless person. And so for 1 week, without telling anybody in his newspaper, without telling anybody in his family, he decided to be a homeless person. And people walked by, they treated them, mistreated him, or whatever people do to the homeless in a situation. And so after 1 week, he wrote some articles which became truly remarkable articles about an expression of empathy, sympathy, to the extent of taking on the persona of another, whether that other is downtrodden or a person of another color or another caste or even another gender. So this is a very, very uniquely human phenomenon. And as I said again, we do not see any of this in the rest of the animal kingdom. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay. Now, we see this again, very among us the animals, we see that human beings have the longest childhood. Human childhood is the longest childhood for all primates. You see a primate, an ape, a monkey, as soon as it's born, 3 weeks later, it's on its feet or running around. This is not true of human beings. Human child is absolutely helpless for a year or so, even longer. And it's a long childhood. People have written, why is it so that our childhood, human childhood, is so long? What is so special about it? It is special because we are not only growing biologically, we are growing culturally. We are growing spiritually. We are letting our humanity come to its fruition. And through that long childhood, we are, in a way, acquainting our children with our history, what is being passed on to them through our culture, through what does it mean to be human. So this idea of long childhood is very crucial to something very special about human growth. Secondly, our relationships are cross-generational. We go through, ancestors and then ancestral memory and mythic memory. So our relationships are not just for a night or 2 or 3 years or 4 years, 5 years, but they go for years and years and years, which is again not something we observe in the animal kingdom. This is something very unique, and that our families, our family relationships, and then we preserve those memories through museums, through memorials, through history, through books, through paintings, through photographs, through movies, so that we feel that from one generation to the other, we are passing on who we are. And so our notion of our self is being shared by the generations that come after us in a manner that is not to be seen and observed anywhere else in the animal kingdom. And so that, too, makes it especially grand. Now, here I show you some pictures from India. Many women, sadly, in India, who were widows, were not treated well. They were not allowed to remarry. And many times they were sort of felt that they were cursed because the husband died. So somehow they are responsible for the death of their husbands, and so the gods have cursed them. So there's a sense of now a new awakening happening in the women and they are celebrating a festival called Festival of Holi, of colors and dyes and so on. And I feel as though there's a new awakening that we can challenge our institutions that have given us a sense of patriarchy, that have given us a sense of attitude towards women, or children, or disabled, or people of certain sexual orientation, that they're being challenged now. And some of our social institutions that have been very strong, sometimes very oppressive, they're not necessarily always nourishing, but very oppressive, that they're being challenged. And so by this particular example I show you from India of these women celebrating this festival and really in a way challenging age-old institutions and its oppression. And this is happening in many societies, whether they are Muslim societies or Christian societies or Western societies or Asian societies. More and more people are asking questions and challenging, is it right? Is it right that we have been denied our humanity? I say this for a long time. For a long time, many people have been denied any place in the banquet table of history. And increasingly, people saying, I too want a place on that banquet table. Many women, for instance, say history is his story, not her story. It is not woman's story, it is man's story. And it's about time that women's story is also told. Same is true by people who say, well, the story of black people, or story of low-caste people in India and some other places. And so everywhere people are asserting that my story needs to be told as well. And that institutions that have denied such story, that those institutions have been unfair, they have been unjust, and this idea of equality and fairness has not pervaded. And it's about time that this idea comes back. So I say institutions have been very strong, very important, social institutions, and every society has institutions. And so much so people say that culture, what we call culture is second nature, because it becomes so much part of you that we do not even question its validity. It's only when people move and see other cultures, then you begin to say, is it right? Is it fair? And in now, many societies are becoming multicultural, so people are asking this question. Should marriages be arranged by your parents? People didn't think about it before, but is it fair? And is it a crime to have sex before marriage? Is it wrong? What is the notion of purity? What is the honor killing? What is shame? So these questions are not being asked because we are now living in a multicultural society. And many people are, not everyone, but many more than ever before. The global forces of globalization have brought us face to face with many things that we never faced before. So I feel that institutions, family institutions, have been very important, but they have not always been fair to everyone. And now increasingly, more and more people are saying that they should be fair. They should accept and respect the human rights and equality for everyone. Can we move to the next one, please? Yeah. Sense of time. Now, this is, again, something very unique to us human beings, very remarkable aspect of us. Now, this year, just 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, was the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. It started on April 24, 1915. I was at another conference attending this. And this started at that particular day, 24th of April. 800 young scholars and intellectuals of Armenian origin were killed by the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Ottoman Empire. And so as I was attending this, I said, human beings are probably the only creature, as far as we know, again I qualify this, as far as we know, who have this sense of time, of past, and how past is always present in many ways, whether the past is of a relationship with a woman, with a man, or past is some sense of resentment, of anger, or something that happened and gave you a sense of joy. So how the past is always present. And then how future keeps invading on our sensibilities and our sense of the present. So much so that sometimes we are not living in the present. It's always either the past or the future that keeps impinging on us. So our sense of time is so very crucial, so very strange in human beings that we don't see any of this in the rest of the animal kingdom. And our sense of time, again, is so complex that how so many times we learn how to forget the past. You see, many of us have problems remembering things as we're getting older. But there are so many people I meet who says, I wish I could forget. Because both of these forces, how do I remember something, and then how do I forget something that it does not stay as a permanent resentment in me and keep corroding my being and keep destroying me. So both forces are very important. How to forget and then move on, and how to forgive and move on. So in human beings, there's all this range of emotions, which we see expressed in our great literature. We see in great films or theater and drama and poetry. This is how the humanities come into fruition and play such an important part in our lives. And so our sense of time, so very crucial, so very distinct, and so very special in us human beings that we do not see it quite even remotely in other animals. We see this again a little bit. As we're studying and learning about elephants, how their memories about certain things and events and grief and death is there. But in human beings, it's not just death. It is an unkind remark or something that hurt our sense of our fairness, our sense of being. So all this resentments and festering of emotions, something that was done to you or you implied or you perceived was done to you. So all these things, our sense of time is again very, very crucial to us. Again, my time is limited, so I'm going to move on here. And this is a remembering how far do we remember our sense of time. I remember a few years ago at the university I was teaching at in Canada, I saw a young man on a summer day reading a book, and I asked him, John, what are you reading? He says, oh, nothing, just killing time. And it's strange to me. I said, why are you killing time? Is time a monster? So because really somehow we have this notion of a strange notion of time, as though it can sit heavy on you, or it gives you pleasure or joy or memories. So the question that now being asked many times by many psychologists, how far do we remember our events in our own life? Can we remember the moment of our own birth? And then the others who have asked, can we remember our past lives? Are they real? Are they just made up? And is there a life after death? Or was there a life before birth? So these are not, sometimes they might seem supernatural questions, but they're also wonderful questions and very complex questions. And they've had a long history of their own. Okay, can we go back? Yeah. So human beings are dreaming creatures. We dream. We envision. We have an inner eye. We imagine things. And we are creators because we have a capacity to imagine and create. Even without seeing a mountain, we can make a great painting of a mountain. And so these are dreaming. We are dreaming creatures. Again, we do not see this great faculty, creative faculty in other creatures. So we are dreaming creatures. Here, this particular sculpture, this young girl is dreaming, dancing with a statue. So what this dreaming does, that we in our own inner eye, as an envisioning eye, we envision so much that it mesmerizes us. How does it function? I remember visiting in 1977, these great statues of Buddha in Afghanistan, which sadly in 1998 they were demolished by the Taliban. They were blown up. And here these are amazing, absolutely amazing statues. So high, so grand, built over 1,500 years ago. And what amazed me is how could these people made these statues in the mountain? How did they imagine that the nose would look like this and the eyes would look like this? Because they're so far away to look at it. So a great artist and a creative person imagines things which without actually seeing things. So we have this great capacity. We do this in music. We do this in writing. We do this in sculpture and painting. We do this in many, many forms of imagining. When Einstein, when he created, he was imagining his theory of relativity. He says, I used to imagine what would it look like if I was riding a beam of light. That is, if I was sitting on a beam of light, what would the world look like? So you're moving with the speed of light, what would the world look like? And suddenly he's a boy of 10 just imagining. And then, of course, 15 years later, he comes up with the theory of relativity. So it's amazing how this capacity to imagine and capacity to dream and capacity to create. And that's how, in a way, people say we are tool-making animals. Well, we are more than tool-making. We make tools, of course. But we also create many things that were completely unheard of. So every society, however primitive, has created science and created art. Science is not just created in the last 300, 400 years. People have been creating and making connections between things in order to say, is it science? Why does it work like this? How does it work? And so same way, art. People have been painting art. And it's not just survival, because our notion of survival is not just physical. We are not just physical beings. We do not live by bread alone. We need many more things. And our sense of dignity, our sense of self-esteem, all this is part of our survival. So from human point of view, when we compare to the animals may be engaged in survival, but we are engaged in more than survival, physical survival. So here then, we see that science, art, and the discovery of various kinds of energies, whether it's nuclear energy or electrical energy, or making different kind of weapons of destruction. So this is all part of human creativity, if you like, and which is so very unique to creatures, to human creatures, not to be seen in other creatures. Can we go back, please? Yeah. So I will conclude here by saying that so much that goes on in the journey we take outside is also going on inside our heads. Our heads, this is will be the greatest challenge of the 21st century. What is the nature of mind? What is the nature of brain? I will have one lecture on to you about it. If we change our minds, can we change our brains? This question. So what is the nature of brain? What is the nature of consciousness? Because there's so much that goes on in this ocean of consciousness. So we begin to say, how does it compare to the other animals? So I feel that in some ways, this idea that the universe is within us. So we take journey outside, as we are doing, taking a cruise on the water. We are going on the ocean. But inside the ocean, there are depths of oceans that still remain unexplored. So I feel that, yes, human beings are unique and special. There are many scientists who do not believe it, and they say it, that human beings are just no different from other animals. My assertion in sharing this with you today is that human beings are special. We are unique. That does not mean that other creatures are not important or they can be crushed or destroyed. They too need to be valued. Every creation is special and grand. But human beings have certain faculties which makes us unique in the sense that we can study the wonder and creation and what other animals do, and the rest of the universe do. So from that point of view, I see my assertion in this and 11 other lectures I present to you tomorrow. I will present to you a lecture on what makes us. Is it our genes or our stars? So it's in that context I say to you, again, in my submission to you, that yes, human beings are special. We are meaning-seeking creatures. We are dreaming creatures. We are scientists at heart. We are artists at heart. We are poets at heart. That is our gift. And those who deny that gift deny our humanity. Thank you.